I'm giving our house to my brother's family. If you refuse, we're getting divorced. Get out right away. My husband's brother, Kevin, retired. Kevin is now living on his pension, and seeing how wasteful it is to pay rent, my husband, Jack, suddenly decided to give our house to Kevin. Kevin's wife, Linda, whom Jack agreed with, also threw some nasty insults at me. What are these two even saying? But I'm the one who inherited this house, I replied, and Jack looked surprised, saying, Huh? Had he forgotten? Having reached my limit with him, I decided to kick Jack out. My name is Catherine Hope. I'm 45 years old. I've been married to my husband Jack for over 20 years. We've not been blessed with children, and since we did not seek infertility treatment, it's just the two of us. Jack was my boss when I was still working, and he was a very reliable person. Ever since my parents died in an accident when I was very young, I've lived with my grandparents. My grandfather was a strict but loving person, and my grandmother was always gentle and supportive to me. I've been able to live this far thanks to their support and love. When I became an adult and started working, it was my turn to take good care of my grandparents. I gave them trips as presents, took them out for meals. We had such a great time. Then suddenly, my grandmother was hospitalized. She was diagnosed with lung cancer and passed away. I mourned and grieved with my grandfather, and although I wished for my grandfather to live as long as possible, the following year he had a stroke and passed away as if following my grandmother. One misfortune after another. My heart was in tatters. During this time, the one who cared for me the most was Jack. He encouraged me, inviting me to dinner when he saw me looking downcast at work. I became attracted to Jack, and we got engaged. Then began our married life. I quit my job because Jack wanted me to, and became a housewife. After getting married, Jack became a dominant husband. This influence came from his older brother Kevin, who is much older. Kevin's wife, Linda, was very dedicated to him. Jack seemed to admire this and wanted me to act like Linda. I did not question Jack's intentions. Kevin was a respectable and sensible man, never forgetting to show his gratitude to his wife. In fact, I supported him earnestly, hoping that Jack could become that way too. From the outside, Linda seemed to be a good wife who supported Kevin tirelessly. However, I did not have a good impression of her, because Linda saw me as a rival and behaved in a way to provoke mistakes from me. Jack, being trapped by Linda's manipulation, started making remarks comparing me and Linda. That was something I couldn't stand. Despite everything, I've always tried to be as selfless and dedicated just as Jack wished for. Jack, however, often compared me to Linda without understanding how I felt. Each time he did that, I was filled with an empty feeling. Today was no different. Jack came home a bit earlier from work than usual. I was surprised as I hadn't received any communication about him returning early. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't expect you to be home this early. Dinner isn't ready yet. When I said this, Jack let out a deep sigh, glanced at me sideways, and handed over his jacket. You really need to take a page out of your sister-in-law's book. You're so inconsiderate. He tossed these words at me and then went into the living room. He turned on the TV and sat heavily on the couch. I rushed to bring him a beer and some snacks. If he was going to come home early, he could have let me know. I felt dissatisfied, but I knew I would face harsh words from him if I voiced these thoughts. Jack sat silently drinking his beer and eating snacks while watching TV. He has never thanked me. He acts as if it's my duty to serve him in this way. Before we were married, he was my boss, and he wouldn't hesitate to scold me if I made any mistakes. Yet, he would never admit his own. He's proud and always wants to impress his brother. It might seem like he's not a nice person when I talk about him this way, but he does have a kind side. I knew this aspect of him, so I lived as he wished. Today, Jack came home late. When I greeted him with, "Welcome home," after 9 o'clock, he silently left his clothes scattered and went straight to the bathroom. He must be really tired from working overtime. Thinking so, I prepared dinner so he could eat as soon as he got out of the shower. Jack sat down at the table silently, and the moment I set his fork down, he started eating. "You're quite late today, huh? You must be tired. Busy day?" Even when I addressed him like this, he gave no response. After finishing his meal in roughly 10 minutes, Jack had his evening drink and went straight to the bedroom. He didn't respond to anything I said during that time. After making sure Jack went to the bedroom, I sighed and started cleaning up the dishes. Once that was done, I also had to prepare a full suit for his work tomorrow. After checking everything, I went to take a bath and then headed to the bedroom. Jack was already asleep, and I carefully went to bed without waking him. Recently, Jack has had many days like this. Not only does he not listen to what I say, but he also doesn't respond to anything. If I persistently ask for a response, he will invariably say, "Shut up," and become grumpy. It's very troublesome when he's in a bad mood and doesn't get over it, and I feel suffocated even though I'm at home. But I couldn't dislike him. On his good days, we would have silly conversations just like old times, and we would eat the desserts he bought us together. So, on days like this, I told myself that he must be in a bad mood, or perhaps one of his subordinates made a mistake. We've been married for more than 20 years now, so maybe this is just the right amount of distance between us. But is it selfish of me to wish for those fun times every day? One day, out of the blue, I received a call from my brother-in-law. It was odd, as he usually calls my husband directly. I wondered what was up. Though curious, I immediately handed the house phone to my husband. "Hello? What's going on, bro?" My husband said, speaking in a lighter tone than usual, and started a pleasant conversation with his brother. During such moments, my husband becomes quite childlike. It's clear how much he looks up to his brother. To avoid interrupting my husband's phone call, I quietly resumed my housework. After my husband finished the call, I went to take the phone back from him. "What's going on with your brother?" Even though I asked, my husband just responded with a, "Yeah." I figured it wasn't anything serious, so I thought and didn't press further. I just went to put the phone back in its place. A few days later, I noticed my husband was sneakily preparing something. I was curious about what he was doing, but hesitated to interrupt him, so I went on with my usual routine. As I was doing housework and casually observing my husband's activities, I noticed him carrying loads of things from the room to the backyard, sorting out what he needed and didn't need. What kind of mindset caused him to suddenly start cleaning? I thought as I finished my chores and took a little break. Then, my husband suddenly stood in front of me. "What are you doing? Get ready already. You see me bustling around, right? Why aren't you doing anything?" "Huh?" I looked at my husband in surprise. Seeing my reaction, he heaved a big sigh and started to say, "Oh, this is exactly why you're hopeless." I think I must have looked dumbfounded at my husband's grumbling. "What are you so angry about?" "You really don't get it? Honestly, I always tell you to take a leaf out of your sister-in-law's book. I shouldn't have to explain everything from scratch." "But if you don't tell me what you're doing, I can't do anything." "Gosh, we talked about this, right? We're moving." I was taken aback by my husband's sudden statement. I had no recollection of such a conversation. Seeing my puzzled face, my husband started to explain in an exasperated tone. "Remember the call from my bro? He's retired. He's gonna live on his pension now, which seems tough. He was saying that it feels like a waste to pay rent for his house, so we're gonna give him ours. That way, he won't have to pay any rent, right?" How can you not get that? I was dumbfounded by my husband's selfishness. Normally, that's something we discuss together, but my husband went ahead and made this decision all by himself. "I never agreed to this. Why do I have to give up our home?" I retorted in a flustered manner. To which my husband barked, "Quiet! No, I can't accept this. I don't want to give up our house. And besides, your brother and his wife, they wouldn't want this either, would they?" While we were having this heated argument, the doorbell rang. My husband motioned towards the front door, urging me to answer it. Frustrated, I ran to the front door, putting the conversation on hold for a moment. Opening the door, I was greeted by my brother-in-law and his wife. When I invited them into the living room, my husband walked towards them with a smile on his face, and then he started to tell them that unbelievable story. My brother-in-law seemed reluctant about my husband's proposal, but Linda seemed quite eager. "Are you serious? I can't accept this." I objected in panic, but my husband shot me a menacing glare. Overpowered by his gaze, I fell silent. Then my husband finally said something outrageous. "I'll give our house to my brother. If you don't agree, we're getting divorced." Linda, with a nasty grin on her face, raised her voice as well. "Yeah, you should leave already." I was annoyed by their attitudes, and instead of voicing my dissatisfaction, I glared at them. Then Linda got confrontational, saying, "What's with that look? You're the wife, you should pay your husband, right? We're family. I think we should make decisions about family matters together. I heard this news today, so I'm just saying that I don't agree with it." Upon hearing my words, my husband gave me a cold stare. Why do I have to receive such a look? I was dissatisfied with my husband. We're family, right? Just because I'm your wife doesn't mean I have to agree with everything, right? I asked my husband, seeking reassurance. I thought he would of course be understanding. However, he harshly responded, "Even though you're my family, you're still my wife. You need to obey me." Upon hearing this, something inside me snapped. "I've heard enough of what you have to say, so let's get divorced." At my words, my husband and my brother-in-law's family gave me a surprised look. "You said it yourself, didn't you? If I don't obey, we'll get divorced. I won't obey you. So let's get divorced." My husband stared at me with wide, terrified eyes, but I didn't flinch. "I'll get the divorce papers. In the meantime, you can pack your belongings or do whatever you need to do." With that, I stormed towards the front door, got into the car, and drove off. I didn't care anymore. After all that I had done for him, my husband sided with Linda instead of me. It makes me sad to think about it. He can do as he pleases. Tears were streaming down my face as I was driving. A few minutes later, I arrived home. There were a lot of boxes ready inside the house, and my husband approached me. "All that's left is your stuff. Pack everything up. All the kitchenware and appliances you've been using, you do it all by yourself," my husband said. I handed him the divorce papers filled out, in response to him. He took them and began to sign with a pen that was nearby. Then, with a smug look on his face, he shoved the divorce papers back at me. "Now we're strangers, so when are you planning to move out? I don't need to leave since we're strangers now, but you should hurry up and go." My husband was dumbfounded at my words and stared at me. "But what are you talking about? We just talked about this. You're leaving too," he said as he raised his voice. Hearing his words, my brother-in-law and his wife rushed over. Looking at everyone's faces, I returned the question. "What are you talking about? I'm the one who inherited the house." At those words, my husband was letting out a dumbfounded, "Huh?" "This is my grandparents' house. You said you wanted to live in this house that I inherited because you thought paying rent was a waste." When I said that, my husband came up to me in clear confusion and said, "What do you mean? I'm your husband, you're my wife. So I automatically inherited, don't I?" "What kind of nonsense are you talking about? You have no relation to my grandparents. Inheritance is something that's passed on to those who are related. Since we have no children, my inheritance is mine." I never imagined that my husband didn't understand the mechanism of inheritance. I was dumbfounded at my husband's lack of common sense. "When I told you about the inheritance, you didn't pay a dime for the property tax of the house and land because it was in my name. Don't you remember?" When I said that, my husband was flustered and at a loss for words. The one who raised her voice instead of my husband was Linda. "It's your fault for not explaining properly. A wife should support her husband. Trying to kick him out in such a deceitful way. What kind of person are you?" Whatever she says, the fact that it is in my name doesn't change. How do you propose to hand it over when the name is different? That's why I said let's have a proper discussion, but Jack never listened. I said as I glared at Linda, "This is going to turn into a big fight, and I could be hit, but that's okay. I disciplined my timid feelings and made up my mind. In the midst of that, my brother-in-law, who had been listening to our conversation, suddenly raised his voice. "Jack, Linda, stop it. Don't cause any more trouble." At the sound of my brother-in-law's loud voice, the two of them jerked their shoulders in surprise. I was also surprised by the two of them and stiffened my body. After glaring at my husband and Linda, my brother-in-law took a step forward. "Catherine, I apologize for my brother and my wife being so selfish." With those words, my brother-in-law hugged me. Seeing such a gesture from him, Linda exclaimed, "Stop it," and sprang forward. "Why are you apologizing? Jack said he would give us the house, so Catherine, his wife, should follow that. There's no need for you to apologize." "Stop it. How disgraceful. Why would you take this house away from Catherine? That's not right, is it? This house is in Catherine's name. Catherine has the right to make decisions here. If anything, Jack should be the one listening to Catherine." With those stern words, my brother-in-law gave a sharp look at my husband. My husband, startled, was lost for words. "Threatening with divorce without even discussing it properly as a couple? I'm ashamed to have a brother like you. Who do you think you are?" With my brother-in-law's words, my husband started to make excuses. But you, big brother, you always impose your ideas on Linda. I believe that's how a husband should behave. That's why I've been tough on my wife." "What are you talking about? Yes, I may spoil Linda at times, but I've never decided important matters by myself or pressured Linda to obey me. In fact, I always appreciate my wife for standing by me." Having been reprimanded by my brother-in-law, my husband finally seemed to realize his mistake, hanging his head in shame with a pale face. Then he cautiously turned his gaze towards me. "Oh, about the divorce, could we put it on hold and have a calm discussion?" I gave my husband a cold stare at his words. "A calm discussion? What are you talking about? We've already decided, haven't we? We're getting a divorce. You're leaving and I'm staying here. What more is there to discuss when it's already been decided? All I want to know is when you're leaving." At my words, my husband seemed stunned. My brother-in-law shook his head, looking exasperated. Linda, beside him, trembled with a pale face. After my brother-in-law and his wife left, I filed for divorce, thereby dissolving my marriage. Despite that, my husband continued to cling to the house, but I never changed my mind. I couldn't bear to be with him any longer. From the moment I had that realization, my love and interest in my husband vanished, leaving only a feeling of emptiness, and wondering what I had been doing all this time. My husband, still hopeful, desperately tried to win my favor, but the gap that had formed between us couldn't be easily filled. It seemed my husband finally accepted my attitude and left a week later. Later, I heard through my brother-in-law that my husband started living alone in an apartment. My brother-in-law repeatedly apologized to me, saying, "I'm sorry my brother caused trouble for such a long time." He also told me he wanted me to be happy. I'm sure my brother-in-law must have felt some resent towards his brother. Apparently, they aren't talking much anymore. I also heard that Linda has become quite meek since that day. Furthermore, the news of my divorce with my husband quickly spread at his workplace. People learned about his abusive behavior and harsh words towards me after marriage, and it seems he lost his place in the company. As for me, I started looking for a job after the divorce. A friend hooked me up, and now I'm working as a full-time employee. The workplace environment is great, and I'm having a blast, still living in that house, full of old memories.